Welcome to the First Time Facilitator podcast. Whether you're a first-time facilitator or a seasoned pro, listen in for tips and tricks to make a bigger impact at the next workshop you deliver. And now, your host, her middle name is Elsie, Leanne Hughes.
Hello everyone and welcome to the show. I'm your host Leanne Hughes and I'm here to help you create unpredictable workshop experiences that predictably work. The show last week was a solo minisode where I shared some travel hacks and ways to prep your flip charts before you enter a workshop or the day of a workshop. So what that means is that this week is an interview show and it's not a one-on-one interview, but a one-on-two interview. So today I'm calling on the Northern Hemisphere and the UK in particular and chatting to Janine, Waldman and Paul Z. Jackson from Solutions Focus. These two are master facilitators. You will pick that up in this conversation. And you may also pick up in the conversation that I was in awe of them, considering their incredibly vast experience, the clients that they've worked with, where they've travelled and taken their facilitation, and how at ease they are with facilitation. It really sounded like it came to them as second nature. I also like how they have diverse backgrounds and bring that together to complement each other in their business work and their facilitation. Today, they're the people behind Solutions Focus, which is a pragmatic and positive methodology to help improve communications for individuals, teams, and organisations. So this tool, the Solutions Focus, is used by professional coaches, leaders, managers, and consultants worldwide to help lead others to their desired results, or as a way of creating respectful and lasting change. Hey, if you're listening in, you may even be accredited in this tool too. If you are, sing out, let us know. I've always been a believer in focusing on solutions. I personally find it very empowering. But I also know that sometimes it's tricky to jolt, I guess, yourself out of your own head and to think of solutions, particularly if you're worried about something. I know when I start to worry, you go down a kind of rabbit hole of continuing to think the worst or this could happen and you do all this crazy scenario planning in your head. I feel like it's important to either have that self-awareness to jolt yourself out of it or to chat to someone who can help you jolt out of it as well. And that's where I think solutions-focused coaching could really help. Now, Janine and Paul's CVs are independently impressive. Janine is a leader in the application of solutions focus in the UK and around the world. As an organisational development consultant, coach, facilitator and author, with 3 decades of experience, she designs and leads learning, development and change initiatives that deliver transformative results. She's held senior HR director positions in the UK and New Zealand multinationals. She has a master's degree in industrial relations and HR management from the London School of Economics and Political Science. And she's a frequent contributor to management journals, keynote speaker at international conferences, and she guest presents on topics at business schools, most recently on building resilience at the London Business School. She's also co-author of Positively Speaking, The Art of Constructive Conversations with a Solutions Focus, and The Resilience Pocketbook. Paul Z. Jackson brings out the best in people as a facilitator, coach and trainer of trainers and facilitators. He draws on his experiences in journalism, comedy production and the BBC to design and deliver impactful, story-rich events that connect directly to the needs of his participants. Now, he has a Master of Arts from Oxford University. I think we've all heard of that uni. And he's a co-author of the groundbreaking book, The Solutions Focus, Making Coaching and Change Simple. He's also the author of other books, including Impro Learning, 58 and a Half Ways to Improvise in Training. What a cool title. The Inspirational Trainer, The Resilience Pocketbook, and Easy. Paul has trained more than 1,000 coaches in the solutions-focused approach, and he also coaches senior executives through to police officers. Now, for those listeners in Australia, Janine and Paul will be touring down under later this year and visiting Perth, Melbourne and Brisbane in November. So if you love what they do and what you hear, you can check out their tour details at solutionsfocuscoaching.live. Remember, if you want to continue the conversation when the podcast is over, you can join our community of over 190 facilitators from all over the world on the free Facebook group, The Flip Chart. On the flip chart, we share all sorts of cool activities, videos and articles. It's a really supportive community, and I really love that we're all driven by the same thing, doing what it takes to make our workshops different and engaging. You can view a link to the group and other resources mentioned in this episode, as well as reach out to Janine and Paul. Their details are in the show notes at firsttimefacilitator.com/episode 78. Now, onto the show. I'd like to welcome to the First Time Facilitator podcast, Paul and Janine. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Leanne. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to this, Leanne. Thanks.
It's really funny because the last time I interviewed two people, that was Catherine Lloyd and Andrew Rickson. And Andrew's actually the person that nominated me to chat to both of you as well. So I always love exploring people's journey into facilitation and what are the career pivots, because I'm finding it's a very diverse field. People from engineering, accounting, people from learning and development. How did you both get started in the field of facilitation?
I came into it from comedy. Was that an unusual route?
I had a humour engineer on the show. He was a former engineer, but he did not come from comedy. He's learnt that. That is very cool. Tell us more about that.
I was a comedy producer for BBC Radio, making programmes that went out on Radio 4 and the World Service, working with comedians and scriptwriters. And it was a very strange step into facilitation. I was on a management training course, a leadership course, and they invited the participants to facilitate something. And I wanted to take a turn, and I taught people a bit about improvisation comedy. And the managers and newsreaders and studio managers and everyone that was on that course immediately got it and really seemed to enjoy the session. So that was transformational. And within 2 years, I'd switched to being a facilitator.
Wow. So you sort of taught everyone the skill and you thought, wow, this is really interesting. I've got a bit of a knack for this. And you must have had really great feedback from that initial comedy improv training sesh. Well done.
That's right. I didn't know that it would be something I could do, but it turned out that people liked it. And they liked my workshops when I started running them. And they said that they were unusual. And because I hadn't got any background in L&D or management, I didn't really know why. So I had to work out why. And that's why I started writing books about facilitation and training.
Bringing in a different perspective, that's great. How about you, Janine?
Well, when I started my career, my first job was at Tesco's and the big retail outlet. And when I got my first job, I went into HR because I always wanted to work with people. And at this time, so it's about 30 years ago, I was really shy and didn't like presenting. And I thought I could influence through HR policy and procedure. And after 6 months, Tesco's came back to us all, the graduates, and said, well, actually, we've got vacancies for you and we'd like you to be trainers. And I thought that was quite terrifying. And I started to stand up in front of groups and discovered that I loved it. I just loved this sharing ideas. And I really realized it was about them and about them learning and developing. And I've been doing it ever since. So I went from really not wanting to speak in public to running workshops and just became fascinated by it. And I moved into L&D in organizations and did training and headed up training teams both here and in New Zealand. And eventually, about 17 years ago, I thought it was time to step out of organisations and pursue what I love, which is the facilitation, the coaching and the training full time. That
sounds very close and parallel to my career path. I wish I could say I got started in comedy. Humour is definitely something, it's definitely a skill. I think some of the best facilitators that I sort of reflect on are the ones that can bring that humour in, and it isn't forced. When you go to a wedding and you hear a best man speech, you know that they've Googled certain jokes, but to have that skill to improv is something amazing. Is it a skill that you can learn, Paul?
It is, yes. Particularly that natural, comedic, non-scripted, improvisational, spontaneous response. The ideas will bubble up in your head, and it's about having the confidence to say them and the judgment of which ones to say and which ones not to say. So my children regularly complain about dad jokes if I'm with them, but I'm a bit more careful with a group in a proper organisation or formal setting. And humour relaxes everyone. If you get a laugh early on, it makes the rest of the day a lot easier.
Yeah, it really does set a really great tone. So how did your two paths intersect, coming from different careers? When did you sort of learn that you wanted to start this business together?
Actually, it was via improvisation. I met someone called Alan Rustan at a conference in America, and he posted that he was interested in connecting with improvisers. And I saw this person post on the list called Paul Z. Jackson, and he said, "Hey, I'm in Bath in England, and I do improv, and if anyone's passing by, drop in." And I was absolutely fascinated by this, so I sent Paul an email. And we met for a coffee, and that was about 17, 18 years ago. And actually, Paul, we talked about improv, and also Paul said to me, "Oh, have you come across solutions focus?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I'm solutions focused. I always talk about solutions." And the conversation evolved, and we started to talk a lot more about the solutions focused approach. And that's it. Yeah, we've been working together ever since.
What a cool story. Wow, that is some length of time to be having your own business together. And let's talk through that, because that's the reason you're coming out all the way to Australia and hitting 3 cities. Can you share with us a bit about the solutions focused approach to anyone that's never heard it before? How would you describe it and how it helps coaches and leaders within teams?
Yes, it's an approach to change. So in any circumstance where change is wanted, whether that's an individual, a team, or a whole organisation, or even sometimes a community, then you can use the solution-focused techniques to accomplish that change by doing just a few things and not doing some other things, which is what makes it distinctive from other approaches to change. And the things that we do are just 3, really. We get absolute clarity about what's wanted by the people involved. People often say what they don't want or what they don't like, or have a very vague idea of what they do like. So there's techniques for getting great clarity about the vision or the direction that the group or the person wants to go. And then we look at the resources of what they've already got that's going to help them get there. That can be physical, financial resources, but also experiences and skills that give them clues and insights into how to accomplish that kind of thing. And then the third and final thing we do is look at what progress along the way would look like, particularly what first small step is going to make a difference. And then we invite people to take that step, see what happens, and if it's helped, to keep doing it, amplify the useful changes. And if it hasn't helped, then very little has been lost. It's only a small step. So we drop that and find something else that's going to prove more useful and continue along that improvisational path to the desired future.
I like that you've sort of chunked it down into 3 steps. And it's funny, the first step being clarity, because it's often an assumption that people know what the change is. And when you do use really great questions in those conversations, sometimes I've been in meetings where we've all had different assumptions of what a change looks like. So even that first step is actually, it sounds like a simple step, but we often overlook it because we're so busy sometimes. What do you find when leaders implement this sort of approach in their organisations, or they give it a crack for the first time? What kind of results do they see?
Well, we call that step the platform, that getting of clarity. And as you say, sometimes it's one thing in one person's head and something completely different. And this can lead to a detachment between a leader who's got an idea and the rest of the organisation who don't really understand what it is and get confused, puzzled, and even distressed when this change starts to happen. So if we can involve more people, which is a good facilitative and consultative idea, we can spend plenty of time getting that clarity. And in getting the clarity, you find that there are certain things that you've already perhaps accomplished that look exactly like that or are well on the way towards that, things that you can keep, that people enjoy. So we make change less scary, less frightening, and more aspirational, more exciting.
Fantastic. And what types of businesses do you find reaching out? Is it the big global multinationals, or is it also small business? Are there change is impacting all of us. And as we know, it's just getting faster and faster as we move along. It's just change is the only constant, it seems. So how did you has the book sort of created a lot of momentum in getting this movement out for you? Or has it been like a push-pull? What have you noticed in terms of the industries that you've worked with?
We find that when people experience solutions focus and see the results, they're keen to learn and do more. And we work across all sorts of industries and around the world as well. So we work with the public sector, the private sector. Most recently, we've been working with DP World, who manage the ports, a number of colleges, Historic England here, who look after all the buildings here in the UK. of historic interest. And so we've worked with many different and diverse people. And we find that if people just experience a little bit of solutions focus, so we spend a couple of days with them and they can do really quite remarkable things in their workplace. So an example from DP World, we worked with their managers, and their IT manager was having some challenges with their satellite navigation system, as in finding containers in ports. He didn't want to say to his team, this isn't working, because this was their baby. They developed it and they built it. So he built a strong platform, and he asked them, what do we want? What are we looking for? And together they used all these techniques and improved the sat-nav system significantly in the organisation. And that was just after a couple of days of working with solutions focus.
That's incredible. Congratulations to both of you. I mean, if you look at that efficiency gain and the innovation as well, I love that. Thank you for the example. So when we're looking at, these leaders that come to your workshops, they might not be leaders, they might even just be, employees in teams. I'm just out of curiosity, do people sort of get sent by their managers and they're thinking, what is this all about? What are you going to teach me? And then through the course of the 2 days, they walk away feeling extremely empowered. Do you get some skeptics at the beginning of your workshops? Because a solutions focus, everyone wants that. And I certainly have had in a few workshops working in highly analytical areas, people that are coming to these things thinking, I'm not going to change, I'm not going to learn anything. How do you kind of cope with that if that does happen for you?
We always do like it if people are voluntary in choosing to come.
Yeah, I agree.
Of course, there are times when we're running programs and entire management, leadership and teams are sent or professionals are sent to this course. And we always start our workshops by asking people what they want, what's important to them. So connect it to the benefits and value to them. And also making very clear that we're offering them a choice of what they do here. If what they're doing in all of their conversations and everything they're changing is working well, then they should keep doing it. If they're looking for something new to add to their toolbox and their toolkit, then we're offering them tools and an approach that can facilitate and support that.
We're working, as Janine said, with Historic England, and they've sent all of their managers who give appraisal conversations to staff to the course. So that's not been voluntary. But they're coming from a position where most of these performance conversations have been less than satisfactory, that people hadn't liked a rather cumbersome system and hadn't enjoyed the conversations, and people weren't becoming inspired or motivated by them. And they've decided that they would introduce a solutions-focused approach to those conversations. And the offer at the beginning is, do you want to have more inspiring conversations? Everyone is at least interested or curious as to what that might be. And then we start practicing those conversations and they can make their choice. And it's been overwhelmingly positively in favour of having those better conversations using SF techniques.
And we're also working with Barking and Dagenham College, a college here, and we worked with 40 of their managers who were told to attend the programme last year. And they all took these tools into their workplace. They tried different things out. We saw all sorts of different projects, from finance systems to using this approach in the classroom. And they had their investors in people audit, which is a quality kite mark here for people and how they manage their people and develop their people. And solutions focus got mentioned 5 times in the report in terms of how it had helped with their leadership, their management, and their conversations. So people, whilst they're sent, they're turning up, they're finding value, and they're applying it to the things that are important and useful to them.
That's really great with ROI as well. Sometimes it's really difficult to measure the long-term ROI on doing a workshop, but stuff like that and getting that qualitative feedback is really important. The other thing I'm thinking about when you say the value of doing something like this is, I don't think this approach is only limited to the workplace. I can imagine if you went home and used this on your partner or on family members, a 3-step approach to conversations, I think you'd also be able to really build those relationships as well. So, I mean, did you get feedback like that from people saying, hey, I could use this on my husband or wife? Does that ever happen?
Oh, we certainly do, Leanne, all the time.
Yeah.
So people come back after day 1 to day 2 or to subsequent sessions, and they have often tested it first on the family, husbands and wives particularly, children as well, with good results. And it's not surprising because the whole of the approach comes originally from solution-focused brief therapy developed by Steve DeShazer and Insoo Kim Berg. And we picked it up from there and took it into organisations via coaching. So it deals with the most difficult personal cases, and it's tremendously effective at that level. And people notice that and use us as that.
Yeah, for example, I was working recently with a group of managers, and the finance manager called Molly came back on the second day of a course, and she said she'd been having a conversation with her daughter, and her daughter wasn't very good at maths. And as a finance person, you could see that this had caused Molly some concern. And they always went through the maths homework every night, and it had become quite torturous. And on this night, Molly decided she went through the homework with her daughter, and she asked her daughter about the questions. She'd got 4 out of 10, and she asked her daughter about the questions she got right and how she got them right. And her daughter got hugely excited about this, about being asked about her successes. And she went away and actually started to work on the questions she got wrong and got some of them right. And Molly said it just changed her whole approach to working with her daughter and homework and how they talked about maths. And her daughter just got better at maths over the days.
If most people would dive in with what was wrong there and the questions that were got wrong and what you should have done instead. But if you start with the ones that were right, it really builds confidence of the person, and it's a much more pleasant conversation, so that they've got much more resource to apply to getting the other things right later.
Yeah.
So of course we want everything right in the end, or as much as possible, but it's about where to start and how to go about doing that. That's the interesting and fascinating difference.
Yeah, it really is. And I love that you're using this with that recent example of all the managers who had to do performance management and performance conversations every year. Because how many managers are out there and they're put into these situations where they need to give feedback, and it's still, we hear, it needs to be more consistent. But from what I'm hearing in organisations, it's still on an annual basis. And I don't know if anyone in the world looks forward to that conversation unless they've had the skills and been trained or given some kind of framework. So, oh gosh, it's so important. And I love the knock-on effect as well of a participant's daughter, like just testing it out one night. Like that is amazing. That's the best testimonial for the next day and leading into day 2. Janine, at the beginning of the episode, you mentioned that you've been bringing this approach to companies internationally. I'd love to talk a bit about that. What's the most exotic location you've had to travel to, or the most culturally different? And have you had to change anything in your approach when delivering that stuff in foreign countries?
Well, we were in Japan. We were in Japan a while ago. That was a wonderful experience. We were running solutions focused workshop, and that was simultaneously translated. So we were speaking and our colleague was translating at the same time. And there were just wonderful moments where we would speak for 5 minutes and our translator would say one word.
Wow.
And everyone would nod wisely. And then the opposite would happen where we would say one word and there would be a number of sentences that followed. So we enjoyed that immensely, and it was a wonderful experience.
How did you build up to that? Were you thinking, right, because I know sometimes in workshops when you're explaining something, you're just sort of riffing, and especially you, Paul, you'd be improving like a boss, but did you have to really think about how do I make this as specific and clear as possible so it can be translated, or were you just very natural and pausing every, say 2 to 3 minutes? How did you prepare?
Well, there are a couple of things. One is that we speak quite simply and often quite slowly when it's with an audience for whom English is not the first language. People often compliment us on that, and they appreciate the understandableness of what we're doing. And the other thing with the Japanese, when we've gone to countries where translation is needed, is we send the materials ahead of time so that our translator can get familiar with them and prepare some slides or some posters. In this particular case, Aoki-san had translated our book, the Positively Speaking book, which we co-wrote. So he was very familiar with the approach himself and is very good at using it himself. So he had his own ideas too. And of course, we don't know exactly how much he was translating us and how much he was saying his own things. But the group were fine. They also understand much more English than they let on. Yeah. We find that in many cultures, that we spend the couple of days working with them, then they'll take us out to dinner and everyone's making toasts in English and telling us their experiences in English. So they're following pretty closely.
I think I've also noticed that sometimes it's just words that people don't know. So we're always encouraging people to share words. I was in Africa recently and I discovered that the word facilitation isn't used very often. And I've been talking about facilitation, training trainers, and I mentioned this word facilitation. And after a couple of hours, someone said, "Excuse me, what's facilitation?" So it's just wonderful, the different words and the differences we bring to that.
Yeah, it really is. And Paul, in that, you mentioned that when you speak in front of groups where English is a second language, you speak more simply and slowly. Being a fast talker myself, as you've probably picked up, pace is very difficult to control. So how did you manage that when you had to start working with these groups? I'm off to Hong Kong in a couple of weeks. Something I'm very mindful of is the pace. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you manage to slow it down. Is it just reminding yourself, hey, slow it down, take your time, pause?
There's certainly that. And there's also a very close connection that you get with the group. So if you're watching them, it's really clear whether they're getting it and joining in and following, or if they're struggling, and you can slow down accordingly. I also invite groups to tell me when to slow down and to ask questions. And wherever possible, the whole style of facilitation is about getting people to talk to each other, and they're invited to do that in whatever language they want. They don't have to have their own conversations in English, even if I'm presenting in English. So a lot of the time they're having their own conversations, joining in, and whoever wants to will represent the group to translate back so that I know something about what's going on from the thoughts that are harvested or the questions that are coming up. So it's a bit of self-talk, as you say, and a bit of connecting with the group and noticing what's happening for them.
Excellent. And you also mentioned that prior to those workshops, you send the resources ahead in advance. Let's talk about not just countries where English is a second language, but just general facilitation and your preparation. What do you both do? Let's just say the night before a workshop and in the morning of, to really get into that state where you can sort of bring the energy or you feel ready to present your workshop. Is there anything, do you have sort of a set routine, or are you pretty relaxed about it now that it's been 17 years?
Well, the night before a workshop, depending on obviously what's going on the night before, I will look through the slides, and I find that that's the time when I'm really focused on the group and what's going to happen. So there might be some last edits, thinking about the first words I'm going to say in the morning, because the night before is when, and even that morning is when you're really focused on that group and what you're going to say. So checking through slides, checking through the message, making sure there's a real thread through what we're saying, so it's connected. If we're working together, very clear. We always have a plan as to who's saying what, and then we improvise. We do have a plan. Also being aware that we're going to be open and responsive to what happens. So a lot of the time, Paul and I will be having discussions, and we'll say, well, what will we do next? And whilst we'll have a plan, it'll always be, well, we'll know when we look at the group, when we hear what they're saying, how we're going to respond.
We had a workshop in Greece where on the second day, they just seemed completely disconnect at one moment from what we were doing. And it was really puzzling because it had all gone well up to them. So we stopped and said, this doesn't seem to be what you want. What is it that you want? We can always revisit that question of what do they want, not only as a result of the workshop, but within the workshop as well. And they clustered together and spoke some Greek to each other for 10 minutes or so. And they came out and said, we want to do this. And they put a topic up for discussion. They asked us to facilitate that for them. And they were very, very happily back on a productive track that mattered to them at that moment. We threw away the afternoon plan. As Janine says, the design, checking that the design is going to have a good flow is what I like to do beforehand. Mm-hmm. And I will also travel to the place the day before so that I'm not flustered in the morning by any strangeness of the journey or difficulty of transport systems. And I get a chance to settle in, preferably even see the room the day before, so that I know what the atmosphere and environment is likely to be.
I think that design's very interesting because we start with a design and it kind of changes over time. And I don't know if anyone else does this as a facilitator, but I sometimes dream about designs of the courses I'm running. So I'll go to sleep and I'll have a question on my mind, how does this work? And it's somewhere during the night it falls into place, or I do dream about it. I'm not sure if that's formal preparation, but I find it happens, and I wake up with clarity.
Yeah, you definitely deserve to be on this show, Janine, if you're dreaming about design. I'm the same as you. Like, I'll have this question like, oh, how will this all fit together? And you sort of just leave it just simmering in your brain, as you know, and then you wake up or you're on a run or something's happening and it all fits. And sometimes you won't really get it until you're in that workshop room and you're seeing it all play out. And then you think, that's how it fits together. This is what I'm learning from being a facilitator. And I guess when I first started was being very tied to the content and hitting the outcomes. And I think it does take a bit of bravery, confidence and experience to be able to ask that question to that group that you had in Greece and say, what do you actually want? Because sort of checking your ego at the door as well, thinking, hey, we're here to deliver this. But what I'm noticing is this, and to be able to actually ask the group is very brave of you. So
it's completely about the group.
Yeah.
And if we take that attitude, then the rest of it follows. I made a note of what I was doing at one conference. I was doing a facilitation of an opening plenary session. I made 6 changes to my plan in the first 2.5 minutes.
Whoa. What prompted the changes?
Well, I could see that they weren't sitting where they needed to be sitting to do the activity I had in mind. So I changed the introductory question of people talking to each other. I had an idea that they would change partners in a certain way, but that was not physically possible. Based on the response that I was getting to the questions, it told me where to go next. I'd have to check the notes to see exactly what all the changes were, but I was paying careful attention to the plan. I thought, I really haven't stuck to this in any detail at all, even in the first couple of minutes.
Unexpected things do happen. Recently, Paul and I were meant to be presenting at the Solutions Focus in Organisations conference. We were doing an opening plenary on the final day, and Paul was sick, so he couldn't make it. And so that was quite a change. And I remember walking to the session thinking, what can I do that will make it different, that will make it my session, because people are kind of expecting both of us. And I do a lot of yoga. So I walked into this room with 150 people, got them all to stand up and do some yoga moves, and then connected my yoga classes that I've been going to for the last 15 years to the topic for the day, which was using old activities in new ways. So, yeah, that kind of responsiveness at the beginning of sessions and really knowing what to do and making changes in response to what's going on.
That's brilliant. And how do you think people can get better at that? If we've got first-time facilitators that are listening in and they want to get to the level that you're at and being able to switch 6 different things in 2.5 minutes and being able to bring in a separate topic into one that's just linking that through forced connection, how do you build that? Is it through the improv work? Because it's kind of what I'm hearing is that this improv theme is playing out. You get an idea and then you have the confidence to go with it and it works for you.
Yes, it is really treating facilitation as a serious craft that you can learn and develop and pay attention to, find out what your own strengths are so that you're playing to those strengths. That's a very solution-focused idea. Being confident to improvise and maybe starting with things that simple and that you suspect are going to work rather than diving in with something that's over-challenging. Practicing more with friendly groups and doing things bit by bit so that you really get a sense of it. Also watching lots of other facilitators work. I can't tell you how much I have stolen from other facilitators. There's loads and loads of exercises and activities freely available, but it's really what you do with them, selecting the right ones and using them to get to the interesting debrief that connects with the topic. So we'd never do anything just as an icebreaker if it's not doing at least 2 or 3 other things for getting the group introduced with each other, bringing a topic into the room, finding out what's on people's minds, all sorts of things that you can do at the same time with any activity. There's a guy called Matt Weinstein who's visible on the internet as a facilitator, particularly of big groups. His specialty is college induction days, where he gets students to get to know each other, often on football pitches, American football pitches. So there's hundreds or even thousands of them working together. And he gets them very active and energized in small groups and running around. And I did a similar thing with some colleges in the UK, and it reduced the dropout rate for that year from 17 or so percent, so quite a big dropout rate, to virtually 0.
Jeez, that's incredible. Congrats again. How about you, Janine? What kind of facilitators are you sort of taken things from that you implement, or what kind of style do you think your facilitation style is?
Wow. I've learned a lot from the people in the solutions focused community, some of the best facilitators I've met. Peter Jarbo, who is in Switzerland. He is an outstanding trainer, presenter, facilitator, and trainer of coaches, for one. And I was trying to think, what's my style? I think it's a natural style, that whilst we can look to all these outstanding facilitators and want to emulate and be like them, it's about bringing yourself to the facilitation, so being the best person you can be. So I too tell stories. I think about the things that resonate with me. I have a friendly, engaging style.
You do.
I was going to say, I should ask Paul. What's my style? Help me out.
It's a tough question to answer for yourself. It's nice that Paul sort of backed you up there, but I can hear that through the conversation that is your style. I can almost hear you smiling on the other end.
Yeah, I think so. And also, I really care about what I talk about. So I love all of the coaching and solutions focus and facilitation. So I really bring a lot of passion to what I'm doing. And I was also thinking about, you said about first-time facilitators, and that's a really strong thing, is bring yourself there, be prepared and be open to letting people see who you are and what you care about and what you're interested in. And the other thing I really like is what's the thread of what I'm talking about here? What's the story? What's the message I'm trying to get across? And that helps as well.
Excellent. So look, you've travelled to Greece, Japan, Africa. I'm sure there's many other countries that you facilitated, and you're coming to Australia later this year, which is fantastic. Is this you've been to Australia before, or is this the first time?
Yeah, we've been a number of times to Australia. About three times to Australia.
Janine's been 3 times. I've been twice.
I was there last year, keynoting at the Solutions Focused conference in Melbourne and running a workshop. And Paul and I were there about 7 or 8 years, running a series of workshops, and some with Andrew, both times with Andrew Rickson.
Oh, cool. So if you could share with our listeners that are based in Australia, what type of person do you think is suitable for what you're offering when you visit Melbourne, Perth and Brisbane later this year?
Well, certainly anyone who's interested in facilitation is going to pick up a lot, both from getting a richer grounding in the solution-focused approach, which lends itself to groups getting what they want, and by watching us facilitate, which we're happy to talk about and make comments about as well as we go along. So they'll get 2 strands going for the price of 1 there. Leaders, managers who want to make changes with their organisations and with their teams, going to get a very effective and practical route towards change. And we'll have a lot of conversations going on about what the issues are that people themselves bring. That will be the topics of some of the conversations, so that they're making progress at the same time that they're practicing the tools.
That is awesome, because how often do we see in training sessions where someone walks out thinking, well, that was really great, but nothing really moved for me. Now I've got to go back to the 400 emails and solve this. The fact that you're working on real life cases and problem situations, opportunities as part of the workshop is, I can imagine that creates a really great energy in the room.
Yeah, and if you think about it, think about how many conversations people have a day. And so any people who are looking to change, adapt, improve, or have different types of conversations and will find value in it. And obviously coaches, because we're working with solutions focus and coaching. So professional coaches, in-house coaches, those that are looking to find out more about coaching or an approach that fits well for them would find this useful too.
Yeah, and that whole, I don't know if it's, I wouldn't say it's a trend, but it's something that's been picked up now, thank goodness, is transitioning from leader and manager to coach. So the role of coach isn't just for people that call themselves that, but it's actually anyone in a leadership position in any organisation needs to take on that role now for these type of changes to work in organisations. So I think this workshop's really helpful for anyone that works in any kind of corporate setting or even running their own business. It's very useful.
Well, it just resonated with me because when I lived in New Zealand, I was head of training for Fisher and Paykel Healthcare over there. And we wanted to do leadership development. And we tried the standard leadership development, the kind of things, vision, mission, and this is what a leader does. And it didn't resonate. It was a dynamic, growing, innovative company. And that's when I came across coaching, actually. And we introduced coaching right through the organisation as a leadership tool. And 20 or so years later, they are still using coaching and positive approaches in their leadership style and in their training. So it's great to see it coming of age. And also we've seen the impact of leaders using coaching as a way of leading.
Yeah, so 20 years ago you brought that approach in. What sort of, I'm just curious, how did that spur on? Did you read a particular book or, 20 years ago, I'm just thinking, how was Google even around then?
No.
I
went to a training course. I met an American woman and I said, what do you do? And she said, I'm a coach. And I said, what's that?
Yeah.
And she told me, and at the time I held the budget, so I hired her to coach me and my boss, and we thought it was great. And that's how we got into coaching. And it was the days before the internet. So we went to America and we found some coaching and we brought that back and started running that through the organisation.
So cool. Good on you for being on that wave. So finally, just very quickly, I'd love to hear if you could offer advice maybe to yourselves back when you first started facilitating. What advice would you give yourself just starting out in the role of facilitator?
To be really curious about the group, put your ego aside, not take it over seriously, because there's always another conversation coming up. If you take a wrong turn, you can still correct it. There'll always be time to repair anything that's happening because you've got the whole of the session to do that. Keep a really close view of what the thread is supposed to be through the day, so that when people take too long or don't spend much time on something, that's okay. You still know what's coming next as the most important part of the chain and how that you're going to bring it to a conclusion or a resolution or a decision or some action steps, whatever it might be. So knowing the thread is very important.
Yeah, I love that.
And remember that you cannot not communicate, so that the group are always responding to you, what you're saying, your body language, your tone, your pitch. So if they're with you, you're doing something well. And maybe if there's a disconnect, maybe it's worth noticing what you've said or what you're doing. So that interrelatedness and the interactions between you and the group and the difference that can make.
That's really strong. I'm just thinking what you're saying is you're kind of always in the spotlight, even say during a break. If you're on your phone or doing something with your body language, people are observing that, and that doesn't just stop when the break's over. It influences the way they might think about what you're going to talk about next.
Yes.
I think this is why I'm so exhausted at the end of a full day workshop, because I'm very mindful of this. It can be quite draining because if you feel like you're always on, you need to be noticing and aware of all of that, plus paying attention, like you said, Paul, shifting your focus to the group as well. So there's a lot to manage there. That's why all of us listening, all of us facilitators, pat on the back for giving this career a crack.
Can I tell you one more story related
I love
to that?
stories. Go for it.
I'd done a day's facilitation and one of the managers came up and said, I've been watching you. You've done nothing all day.
Yeah.
And I said, thank you very much.
Why did he say that?
Because the design was so spot on.
Oh.
I had the group doing all the things that they needed to do in a very fluent, seamless way. So it seemed like it had been very easy for me. Of course, I'd done the design, which maybe had mental agonies involved, and I'd watched the group. And if they'd gone off track, I'd have been in there. I probably was doing bits of nudging and reshaping and adjusting, but that's not visible to the group, and it doesn't have to be. So if you're almost invisible, that can be the sign of having done good facilitation, as long as they've got to the outcome or the conclusion that they wanted to reach, which they had. That's why I said thank you. I assumed he'd realised all that.
Yeah.
Same organisation, I think they watch us. Same organisation. Someone said that to me at the end of the day, and they said, I've been watching you all day. She said, you're still full of energy. How do you do it? It is quite exhausting, but always showing that energy and engagement right through to the end of the day.
Wow, I'd love that energy at the end of the day, Janine. What you were talking about then kind of reminded me of like a football game and a referee, and you only notice the referee when they're a great game. The players are the spotlight and the game's won. But when you notice the referee talking about the referee, it's not a good thing. So
that's right. And same with the coach on the side of the pitch.
Yes.
They don't have to be the loudest, most jumping up and down ones that are the most effective ones.
They're sort of giving their players a nudge and giving them a couple of pointers through the game, but that's it. They're not the show.
Yeah,
they notice things like how you get like innovative ways to get people into groups, and there is a sense of safety in the room.
Yes, creating that safe space. It's entirely about doing that so people are comfortable to share, give of their best, and pitch into the hard work that we expect them to do. We create the environment in which they can do that.
I think that's a really good ambition, is to say at the end of the day, it looked like I did nothing. That's actually quite a good goal to aim for, because it meant that your design has been seamless. The group has led the way. Well, they felt like they have, which is also very empowering for that group.
Yes.
Yeah, which sounds counterintuitive. It's the first time I've sort of come to that conclusion. So thank you for helping me get there. It's taken 77 episodes. So I could talk to you for hours about this stuff. It's just, your stories are incredible, and where you've traveled to and your experience. I'm sure you've got a ton of great stories, possibly even a horror story thrown in as well. If we've got some listeners that would love to connect with you, where can they find you?
thesolutionsfocus.co.uk, or use the same web address but contact@thesolutionsfocus.co.uk, and they can reach us directly there. Email to us both.
Yeah, we'll pop a link to that in the show notes, as well as link to your LinkedIn profiles if people want to connect with you on that platform. And
we're on LinkedIn as our individual names, Paul Z. Jackson and Janine Waldman, and as the Solutions Focus as well, which is where most of the blog posts and LinkedIn messages and useful free stuff goes.
Cool. And we'll also pop a link to your event that's coming up in Australia as well on the show notes page as well. Thank you both so much for your time this morning. It's evening for me, but I'm super impressed, and I've picked up a lot from this conversation as well. So I'm very grateful for you spending the time with me having this chat, and I'm sure those listening all around the world as well. We might have to rename the podcast if they don't know what facilitation is in Africa. So I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for your stories and your insight today.
Thank you.
Pleasure, Leanne. Thanks very much.
Hey, thanks so much for sticking around. You've reached the end of another episode of the First Time Facilitator podcast. Connect with the show at firsttimefacilitator.com, or follow me on Instagram at Leanne Hughes to find out what I'm up to during the week. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to share it with someone who will also appreciate the insight, and make it easier for yourself and subscribe to the show in your podcast player of choice. Thank you so much for listening, and chat to you next week.